This is Intro to Logic. In this video, we'll be going over disjunctions and or introduction. Disjunctions are what we might call or sentences. A prime example of a disjunction is the sentence P or Q. Notice that P and Q are united by a lowercase v, and this symbol represents the or part of the sentence. And both P and Q are what we call the disjuncts of the sentence. Disjunctions, one of the cool things about them is that we encounter them all the time, pretty much every day. So when I wake up first thing in the morning, I might ask myself, what will I have for breakfast? And when thinking through my options, I think, okay, well, I will eat cereal or toast. So this is a good example of a disjunction. One of our disjuncts is I will eat cereal, and the other is I will eat toast. And we'd represent that, of course, with the lowercase v as our disjunction symbol. So C or T. Now there are a couple things you need to keep in mind about disjunctions. First of all, any disjunction must have at least two disjuncts. So we could have the simple disjunction P or Q, where both P and Q are our disjuncts. But we could also have a disjunction with an infinite amount of disjuncts. So we could have P or Q, or T, or if S then R, or P and Q, and so on. Now another thing to keep in mind is that the disjuncts need not be single letters. Notice that here we have two complex disjuncts. We have a conditional, if S then R, and we have a conjunction, P and Q. So disjuncts can be very complex, or they can be as simple and just a single letter. So be sure to keep these in mind when we're learning more about disjunctions and or introduction. Now while disjunctions are common and pretty easy to get a grasp of, keep in mind that there are two types of or sentences. The first kind is what we call an inclusive or. A great example of an inclusive or sentence is one where you walk into a coffee shop, you're ordering a cup of coffee, and you notice a sign on the door or on the register that reads, "Ask employee for cream or sugar." When you read this sign, you realize that you're allowed to order either cream or sugar, or both cream or sugar. And if you were to respond to this sign by saying, "I would like cream and sugar," there'd be nothing wrong with that, because the sign reads that you can ask for one or the other or both. And that's what an inclusive or sentence allows. It allows that we have a disjunction like C or S, cream or sugar, and either one or the other disjunct could be true, or both could be true, and the whole sentence will be true. So now compare this with the exclusive or sentence. Things will get clear when you know the difference between the inclusive or and the exclusive or. For an exclusive or sentence, either P or Q could be true, but not both. So when we write out the symbolic form, it reads like this: P or Q and not both P and Q. And this is how we read an exclusive or sentence in symbolic form. So now what's a good example of an exclusive or sentence? Well, consider maybe there's a big game going on tonight in town, a big basketball game perhaps between the local high schools, and you overhear a friend saying, either the Mustangs or the Tigers will win. Now this is a good example of an exclusive or sentence because either the Mustangs or the Tigers will win but clearly not both the Mustangs and the Tigers will win. In order to win, only one team can win. You can't have both teams if there's to be a winner. It's one way of putting it. So this is a good example of the exclusive or. Now be sure to compare and contrast the differences between inclusive and exclusive ors. Try coming up with your own examples and then also writing it into logical form. And that's really good practice for understanding the differences between the types of or sentences. Moving on, one of our rules having to do with disjunctions is what we call or introduction, which can be symbolized with the or sign and a capital I. And now according to this rule, we can take any pre-existing premise and use that premise to create a disjunction. So for example, using line 1, I could create the disjunction P or S and write 1 or introduction. I could also use line 1 to create the premise P or not Q, 1 or introduction. I could create a disjunction using line 2 now. I could say P or S or T, line 2 or introduction, and so on. So there are endless possibilities with this new rule or introduction, but perhaps because it's so easy to use, people often forget that it's an option. So be sure to keep it on your list of rules of inference whenever you do proofs and consider it as an option. Let's practice a small proof using or introduction. So here we have a sequent and we have our assumptions, P or Q, then R and P, and we have our conclusion R. So using or introduction, we can use line 2 to create the disjunction P or Q. And now using this disjunction, we can combine lines 1 and 3 to arrive at our answer, R. And that's that. Another rule having to do with disjunctions is what we call disjunctive syllogism, which can be represented with DS. Now, according to disjunctive syllogism, if we have a disjunction as one of our premises and the negation of either disjunct, so in this case either not P or not Q, then we can derive the other disjunct. So if I have P or Q as my first premise and not P as my second premise, I can use lines 1 and 2 and DS to derive Q. Similarly, if I have P and Q, or P or Q, and not Q as my premises, I can derive P using lines 1, 2, and DS. And here's another example. Say that I have P or not S as my first assumption and S as my second assumption. It's common that people will use lines 1 and 2 to arrive at P with disjunctive syllogism. However, this is technically not correct, and you need to be careful to not do this. The problem here is that according to disjunctive syllogism, you have to have the negation of one of the disjuncts to arrive at the other disjunct. And notice that S is not the negation of not S. S is the opposite of not S, but not S is the negation of not S. So what we have to do before we can use disjunctive syllogism is double negate line 2 and then use not S, the negation of not S, to arrive at P with disjunctive syllogism. So now we have 1, 3, DS. And that's how you can use disjunctive syllogism with negations. So be really careful and make sure that you understand the difference between the negations and the opposites of sentence letters. This has been an Intro to Logic video on disjunctions and or introduction. Be sure to keep practicing, and we'll see you next time.